My name is Seth Van Orden. I'm from Central Illinois, but I currently live in Madison. I've been here for the last 9 years. So I've done a little bit of designing. As I was thinking about a potential topic, I thought, well, I probably can cram everything I know about it in an hour or less. So I don't know that much. So hopefully I'm just going to throw things at you, information, lessons I've learned, a hodgepodge of information. So hopefully some of it's helpful. A little bit about myself. I grew up I'm the youngest of 8 kids. We used to play a lot of board games and video games growing up. And then I got married. The video game side went sort of off to the wayside. I got more into board games. And I love designing things. I've always liked to build things and design things growing up. And when I moved out here, I work for Epic. If you have heard, it's a medical software company here in Madison area. I'm a software developer there. So I like to design software as well as board games. And Matt, the lawyer, used to work at Epic. I don't think he does anymore. But first game we had, so I'm with Nauvoo Games. There's 2 of us, me and Brett Sobel. We started off with Stockpile. So this is the Epic edition. We have a couple expansions to it. That came out in 2015. It's our bestseller. It's in the I think, top 300 or so, something like that on Board Game Geek. And then we came up with Crosstalk, and then The Reckoners, based on a book series by Brandon Sanderson, and then Pinpoint, and then our next game, Raising Robots, hopefully coming out next year. So hopefully get some play testing of that this weekend. So the different things I want to talk about. So for Nauvoo Games, I take care of more of the design half, and Brett handles more of the publishing side, but we both do both. I remember the first time we took Stockpile, I tried it, I think it was the Milwaukee Protospiel was the first time we tried it. It actually was a bounty hunter theme to start with. It's changed quite a bit in the theme. It's now a stock market theme. I remember going to Gen Con with what people called a donut box, holding my prototype and begging people to play it over and over again in their play hall. Now I don't have to do that anymore. Thankfully, we have enough of a following that we don't have to beg people to play games with us. But people have asked in the past, I've gotten a lot of help from a lot of designers, a lot of mentors. When we first got started, if you guys know Out of the Box Games, the original publishers of Apples to Apples, they did a lot of other party games, mostly party games. Al Waller was the owner. He was someone who helped us out. We stored games with him for a while there. We've just gotten a lot of help. There's a great community of helping other designers, so I wanted to pass on a few things. First thing I want to sort of emphasize is do your homework. As a small publisher of having 2 people, and we do this part-time, we probably won't change that. We both have good jobs that we are fortunate to have. If you were going to guess how many game pitches we get without doing any work on our side, how many game pitches do you think we get a year?
100.
Yeah, it's around, probably a little bit more than 100, but about 100 a year. Out of the 100 a year, we've never taken any, as you can tell. I mean, yeah. I mean, we're open to it, but there's a couple factors. A, if you're good enough to, like, you've already been published, often you'll go to someone bigger than us because we're small. But out of all so I've seen probably at least 500 pitches at least, and I've only seen 2 that have pitched that actually got published. So not only are we denying 500 of them, everyone else is also denying those 500. So something to keep in mind as the funny thing is there's still thousands and thousands of games getting published. So if you take all the people that are not getting published and the ratio that actually gets published, it's a very small ratio. That means there's a lot of bad games out there. Now, yeah.
Is this like all sorts of pitches, like in the hallway, hand waving, or is this like legit, like?
Most are fully fleshed out pitches that are emailed to us with sell sheets or videos or other things. So this is like 500 of those. And most I can tell within a couple seconds it's not for us. Whether or not I know it's a great game. Some I can tell it's a bad game right away. But a lot of times I can tell right away it's not us. It has Take That, not us. Or it's a war game, not us. If it's a collectible card game, not us. So most of them I can tell right away, at least not us. So yeah, do your homework. And what I mean by that is, I don't know how many games you personally own or have personally played, but you need to play a lot. You need to be watching reviews a lot. Even if it takes a lot of time to stay up to date on games. And sometimes people underestimate. A lot of times new designers don't realize the amount of work it takes to know what's new. When someone comes up to us and pitches a game and they say they've been working on it for 3-5 years, that's a bad sign. The industry has changed a lot in 3 to 5 years. What's hot has changed a lot in 3 to 5 years. So if you've been working on a 3 to 5 year game, you're probably doing it wrong. Now, I'm not saying there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but that's usually a red flag. So to go along with that, I only know of 2 that have made it to the market, one of which did okay, was with Renegades, didn't do great. The second one had a big change between the time we saw it and the time it got published. And we were already like, oh, that's, some good things. That was Tiny Towns, but AEG eventually published it. And I'm happy with the guy. He'd made one key change that I thought was like, oh, that was really smart addition. That changed the game significantly. Now, if you come up with a bad game, don't get discouraged. We've come up with a bunch of bad games. A bad game is not a problem. Coming up with bad games is not a problem. It's the time you waste on bad games. It's getting to the finding the magic. We come up with tons of ideas that turn out to be duds. It's about getting past those duds and finding what the magic is. So there's, of course, the sunk cost fallacy, right? Of the more time you've spent on something, the more money you've spent on something, the more you want it to work, right? If you've spent $200 on a Kickstarter, you're going to try a lot harder to like that Kickstarter product than if you spent $20 on a Kickstarter. It didn't work out, it was $20, not a big deal. You spent $200, big deal. Same with game design. Sometimes it takes us 20 hours to even get the first iteration on there. You've already spent 20 hours, you really want it to work. But if it's not working, you need to get to that point of deciding it's not working as fast as possible so you can get to the next iteration of something that's completely different. And that's one of the things that I find new designers have the problem the most, is they really want to make something work. So I remember the first thing that we really sunk our teeth in was a tower defense game before Stockpile was, and it just didn't work. There's just too many calculations. The computer could do it way better. We spent a lot of time on it. We eventually gave up on it. But we could have gotten to that give up point a lot faster if we were honest with ourselves. So it's okay to come up with bad ideas. Everyone does it. And it's sort of any creative work. Just get to the good stuff. Don't waste your time on the bad stuff. And it's okay if you cut off. Like I said, Stockpile started as a bounty hunter game. Half of the game worked, half of the game was terrible. But we found the magic in half the game. There was a part of the mechanic that was like, actually, that's really fun. Let's keep that half, and we cut off half of the game. And then we're like, all right, what can we do with this other half that we're keeping? So feel free to cut and paste as you do stuff. This is an interesting one that another designer told me. He said, design games you like to play. Now, the reason I say that is because, A, you're going to be playing it a lot. If it eventually gets published, it's nice to have a game you enjoy to play. But you're also usually, in my experience, you're an expert in the games you like, right? For example, I have a brother who likes to do some game design too, and he's trying to help me give advice on a war game. I don't know anything about war games. I don't know anything about what modern war games have done recently. I have no experience in that. And that takes a lot of research to stay up to date with. So I'm not an expert. Even if you had the best war game ever, I wouldn't buy it because I'm not interested in it. So you need to find, if you're designing games, find the things that you would want to buy as a purchaser and design towards that. Going along with that, I find it helpful to treat each board game as a sort of a business case. If you've ever taken a business class of how to make a business successful, I think a lot of those skills and those exercises are very helpful when trying to make a board game that's successful. Of where's the market, what's it need? Finding the need is important in a board game. What's needed for the next board game? For me, I'm a mechanics first board gamer as a player and also as a designer. And it's not the only way. There's people that are very successful designers as theme first, but I am very much a mechanics first because that's how I enjoy games. I could care less what the theme is as long as the mechanics are fun. So for me, a couple of helpful things that help me find that magic is one, looking for something that's broken, looking for something that can be improved, something that's not working in another game and improving it. And then number two, looking for a variation of something that already exists. So let's go with the what's broken. You could go back in time and retroactively find how a new mechanic has solved a previous problem. For example, let's take something like Magic the Gathering, a very popular game, right? And there has been a lot of people that have fixed it in different ways, and you can fix a problem in multiple ways and still have success, right? There's deck building, right? Oh, what's the problem with Magic the Gathering? It's expensive. Whoever has the most money wins. It takes a long time to build the deck or whatever it might be. But there's fun aspects. Well, let's take the deck building aspect and go with that. Or let's take a living card game, takes Magic the Gathering, but now we have a controlled subset and it's not as much who has the most money wins, right? So there's different ways to solve the same problem, and it's okay that you solve it a different way that's already been solved and come up with a new, fresh idea. Another thing you can do is look for variation. For example, when deck building came out, I've used this mechanic already discussing. We've never used deck building in any of our games, but trying to solve deck building in a different way was actually one of the inspirations for Stockpile. So Stockpile came a couple years after deck building had been around, but there was Dominion, and then there was Ascension, there was a few other ones. They just have different ways of building your deck, right? One of them has it from 10 set piles that you sort of get cards from. One has a row of way of getting your cards. And so I thought, well, there's a couple different ways, and those different ways make a big difference. So what if I can come up with a new way of collecting those cards to use to make my deck? And so in Stockpile, you build piles of cards, some face up, some face down, that the players make. And then you collect those. And so the first iteration that was a bounty hunter game was we would build those piles together, and then the second half of the game was playing our deck out that we sort of purchased in this auction mechanic. And it turned out that auction mechanic was really fun. The collecting was really fun of how you place things face up and face down. What did he place there? I don't know. Maybe he's bluffing, maybe he's not. And that was really fun. But actually playing the deck out we wanted just to find out who won from the first half. So why don't we just reveal who did better? And so how do we just sort of reveal? And then we had stocks, and we went from there. But it was part of the way to get that creative juices going is we were looking for a problem and trying to solve it. So either trying a problem to solve it, or number two, trying a new way of doing something. So for example, Reckoners. This one was a unique challenge because this was based on a book series, so I couldn't do mechanics first. I already had a theme, and I had to find the mechanics that worked with it. And we went through a lot of things that did not work from the book. And if you do something based on an IP, you have to be careful that you don't try to fit it too well, because most of the time, sometimes people try to do it too well, and it's actually not fun. So my opinion is find a mechanics that could be matched. So in the end, we really liked King of Tokyo, and that's one of our favorite games. We had at this point, there's a few others that are out there that do that now, but there was no cooperative King of Tokyo. And so essentially, we were like, what if we did King of Tokyo cooperative? We knew with the storyline of the book series, it had to be cooperative, and we tried a lot of other things that didn't work, but we knew there was King of Tokyo. It was a solution that already worked. It was a formula that already worked. It's already fun to roll the dice and pick which ones to keep and which ones to re-roll. That was a formula that worked. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's do that, but let's do it as a group. What if we do it simultaneously? We all have our own dice. We decide where to use it and combine that with sort of a pandemic style, and it worked out. Yeah, so this is a book series by Brandon Sanderson. In that book series, a subsection of the population have all received superpowers. They are epic. But whatever made them epic also turned them evil. So you're a group of normal individuals trying to hunt down these supervillains and bring them to justice. I can do a segue here. I have it on my notes to talk about this. Anyways, one question we often get is, how did we get Brandon Sanderson? And this is kind of goes along with the previous question. How do we get the rights to the Reckoners? So the story goes Brandon Sanderson was going to Milwaukee for a book signing. And I was just here in Madison, and I was like, wouldn't it be real cool if we could get his rights for one of his books? So I just picked up some of my things for him to sign, has his names on it, and just drove over to Milwaukee. And he had a book reading at one of the stores, and then I opened for questions, and I was the first one to raise my hand. And I said, how does someone get the rights to your book series? And he said, first, you need to have a track record. You need to have previous games, or whatever it might be. And then you come talk to us, and we'll try out your previous games, check those things out, and then we'll go from there. So I got in line, I got my stuff so they could sign. I was like, I got the game right here. This is this stockpile that we love your stuff. He says, great. I don't play board games, but my people do. So here's their information. Go talk to them. So part of it is, I would never suggest if you're interested in making a game for an IP, to start with that. So not that they're likely not going to give you the rights unless you have a track record of they can make good games, because it's their baby, right? They don't want to just give it to some person who just thinks they can make a good game out of it. They want to see someone who's actually made good games previously and then trust them. And now he's too big. He did a $13 million Kickstarter and things like that. So, or $30 million Kickstarter, whatever it is. And we've talked to them, and they're like, oh, we'll see. But we've heard that they really want some of the really big people. So, and that's fine. They've been good to us. So don't get me wrong. We've been happy with all the time we've worked with them. But yes, so number one, have a track record first. 2, put yourself out there is my 2 main things to suggest if you want an IP.
And so is that how they got Tool before he was?
Yeah. So that's a good question. He was not big like he is now, and he's too big for us now. Like he puts us, like we have a stockpile. We have one group that's Matago Games really wants to do stockpile in France, but they don't think anyone will buy an American stock market game, which is fair. And so they want us to re-theme it, and we wanted to say, hey, before you do that, we actually want to see if we can reuse the mechanics in a different game that's actually different enough, and then we can resell it in the US as well. So anyways, the reason why I bring this up is like since he's done all the other ones, he's more interested in helping us out doing with this next version. But even that, he's so booked out. He's just so good. And but even working with him, even when he wasn't so busy, it was just tough because he just had tons of projects. And no, he's great. Tool's great, and he was a decent price for how great he was. But now we've had to find other people, which has been a shame. But because he's awesome. But yeah, so if ever advice when you're trying to find illustrators, graphic designers, find ones you like and contact them. Most of them want to be found. Some of them are too busy or work for an individual company, but use Board Game Geek to look around. Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit. I just want to re-emphasize, you need to do your homework. You need to be playing tons of games. Anything, if you're trying to do a hidden movement game, play every hidden movement game that's out there. Everyone that's highly rated, you need to be playing them. If you can't afford to buy them, go borrow them from friends, get them from the shop. But you really need to know all of them because likely there's people that have already learned from it. And then also watch the reviews. Find out what people don't like about them already. So we talked about learning, finding what's broken. That's one of our games, Pinpoint. I have a designer diary out there between Pinpoint and Wavelength. Wavelength is a very popular party game. Also, we have found out through the course of this is one of the lessons learned. We can't sell party games. We're terrible at it. It takes a lot of marketing. We do this like a couple hours a week, so we just don't have the bandwidth. Even though they have had decent ratings, we'll probably never do a party game again. They just don't sell for us. But Pinpoint, so Wavelength was a party game, and it uses a device. And there was just some things about it that, in our opinion, or my opinion, was broken. One of which is there's one clue giver, and the time it takes to find that clue. It's a really thinky party game, sort of like code names and things like that. It takes a long time to think of that clue, and that's all right, and that's kind of the fun of it. But everyone else is just sitting there and waiting, right? Well, what if we could do it simultaneously, where everyone knows what their clue is and able to think of it at the same time? Well, that's a solution. You can play the same game and 20 minutes, 20 minutes where it could take an hour, right? And there were several other big improvements. And a lot of times, I'm not recommending just taking a house rule of a minor change and then just trying to publish it. That's a other published game. We make a lot of house rules, and I think that's a good practice because not everyone who publishes things. It's funny when you have these discussions on some of these threads. There's some people that hold designers as sacred, or their favorite designer is sacred, and they don't make mistakes. Like, Jamie Stegmaier, which I love, Jamie Stegmaier. There's fan clubs of him that are like, hey, he did this on purpose, and this is how it's supposed to be. And and for us, every Jamie Stegmaier game has probably a dozen different house rules, and that's fine. Part of that is our own preference. We don't like certain things the way he does it, and that's okay. But I think making those house rules is a good way to find what's broken in the games you're playing, what isn't working, why doesn't work. Reading reviews of, if you're doing a hidden movement game, find out what's wrong with all the hidden movements. What's the common thing that people hate? Oh, it takes too long, too much setup, or whatever it might be. Find what it is, try to fix it. All right, what are we doing on time here? Good. All right, this is a lesson learned from Pinpoint. I was just bringing up Pinpoint, so I'll mention it. I'll just go through some of the lessons learned from each of some of our games here. So Pinpoint is 3 games in one, right? 3 games for one cost. That's great value, right? So obviously there was a deciding moment of, do we do that, do we not do that? There's a lot of reasons why you can do it, why you might not want to do it. For us, it was saving a lot of components. There was one of the games that's really good for like couples, like a newlywed game, and we thought, well, that's a very niche game. No one's really going to go and buy that, but if you had it already, you might play that in that really rare case that you have like the perfect situation for that. And so in new ways, we decided to put these 3 games in one. It was all very cost efficient. And funny thing happened. One thing that we did not anticipate with it was we'd get reviewers that would say, play this game. This game is a 9. This of the 3 games, I would give a 9. This one I would give a 7.5, and this one I would give a 6, right? But then their overall score is a 7.5. And you're like, wait, we gave you all 3 games, cost you $20, same price it would have been for any one of the games. You gave it the average score instead of the high score. If you had just had just the high score and we left out the other 2 games, why are you getting angry at us lowering our score? Because, and it's natural. It's natural to think, I rank it this, so the overall product must be an average, right? It's nothing that we really expected would be. It was interesting. It was weird. So that was just a side effect of having multiple games in the same box. And the funny thing is that, well, you'd easily say, why don't you just put the most fun game? The highest rated one for each reviewer was often different, which is a funny thing. So, which we kind of expected, in that there's certain games that just worked well with certain groups, and there's certain ones that were niche, right? If the game that was meant for couples, if the reviewer is not married or in a relationship, they're not going to like that couple game. They might think it's just okay, and that's all right. So just something to keep in mind. One of the lessons learned from Pinpoint. All right, let's talk lesson learned from Crosstalk. So this one's, like I said, we can't sell party games. When one of the reviews, when we're deciding how many to print of this, first off, we came off of Stockpile, which did really well. And Crosstalk has done okay, and it's gotten decent ratings. But when we were sending out review copies, we sent one to one of the reviewer that said it was going to be the next Codenames. And that got us excited. It's not the next Codenames, and not even close to the next Codenames. But we definitely overprinted. Part of it is just sort of knowing your market, but knowing what you can sell and what you can't sell. So I have a friend, you guys know Facade, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing it wrong, Facade Games. He does a lot of social deduction games. And he's really good on Kickstarter. He's really good at Reddit. Every time he has this Reddit, that just goes nuts, and he sells tons of games on his Kickstarters. But anyways, every single one of his games is always the same style game. It's always a social seduction game. It looks like a nice book. It's really cute. But the good news is, every time he does a next social deduction game, all of his backers already like social deduction games. He already found a market for him, the next one. For us, we have a stock market theme, we have a party game, we have a Brandon Sanderson deep thematic game. That doesn't help. Not to say I regret really any of these things, but just keep that in mind. Something that can be helpful is if you have like a theme of games, you can find, the last one sold well, and I can market to that same group and say, you will like this next game because it's in a similar vein. So keep that in mind. Not something that we necessarily anticipated. That said, we're proud of all of our games, so can't complain there. Other lessons learned, let's talk Reckoners. So this is our first and only, and maybe our last cooperative game. We'll see. Cooperative games are tough. They take a lot of work to get everything, all the values right and everything like that. They're a lot of fun. Something we had 4 difficulty levels. We had normal, medium, hard, and sparks or something like that. And I remember, and I can, after at least now, so you have in the game, start with 40 lives that you're trying to protect. You lose all those lives, you lose, right? I could always beat, by the time we published it, I could beat the game on Sparks, the base game of the Sparks, easily, not about a problem. As you continue to play it, you get better and better. As I get ready for the expansion, I played a lot. I could easily beat the game with still half the lives left from Sparks. And yet we would get reviewers, including Tom Vassell, if you're a big fan of Tom Vassell. I'm a big fan of Tom Vassell. That he gave me a call on my cell phone, which was a weird call to get on at work. And be like, Tom, he's like, this game is too hard. He's like, I love this game, but it's too hard. And he was losing on the very basic level. And he's a gamer. He's like a big gamer. He plays games all the time. But he was losing all the time, and he wasn't getting close. And yet, on Sparks, we were winning all the time. And this is a dice game. I mean, there's luck involved, but I could like consistently always win. And something we learned throughout this process is the funny thing is we get in BGG, you'll get half the group say the game is way too hard. We get half the group to say the game is way too easy, I can never lose it, I'm never going to lose it. It's way too easy. Now, in the expansion, we expanded both easy and hard and went both the directions. But we should have done that on the base game. That just, FYI, there are some really terrible gamers out there, and there's some really amazing gamers out there, and that spread is huge, right? It's a lot bigger than we thought it was. Like 4 difficulty levels, there's a big difference between the easy and the hard, and yet there was some people, expert gamers that feel like they're really good, that still couldn't handle that basic stuff. They just didn't click. And there are some other ones that could just breeze through it, just clicked, went through it, and it was too easy for them. So if you're making a cooperative game, make sure there's a good big range.
So to follow up with that, that's really curious. And you never found out if it was something about like misreading of rules or like through play testing? Did you find that? Like that seems so weird that it's such a big divide, you know?
So so we watched him play it once because he did a playthrough and he lost. Now, unfortunately, we did a live playthrough and I had a work schedule thing, and so I missed the beginning of it. And he did one rule wrong that he knew was wrong later. He just missed it, and it might have made a difference that he would have won there. And he's won the game some on easiest level, but he still is not happy with the fact that it was so hard to get to win that level. So part of the reason in this game, and I can give maybe some specifics for this one, is you have 6 dice you're rolling, sort of Yahtzee style. You roll 3 times, and you have these 3 special dice, which have one of the sides is a double side, double value. And so each time you get that lucky value, that's like an extra action. And too often, new players would roll those dice, and they would, because each side has a different action on it, and people would take those special dice and sort of lock them in too early, and not give themselves extra rolls to get the chance of getting those sort of doubles. There was a couple other like things that new players would consistently do, and so we had in the rules like, oh, if you're having trouble, go to this website, and we set up something of tips. we probably could have put that in the rule book of some basic tips that would have probably helped some people. But yeah, there's just the natural inclination of, I see a cool side that I know I want. The thing is, every choice was good, just a double choice was better, and some people just fell for the, I'll lock it in because I like that side of the dice. But that was one of the two main gotchas, but yeah.
So I haven't played the game. How
Yeah.
does it do difficulty ramp up? Like, so the pandemic, you just add more epidemic cards, more being harder. How does your cooperative game do it?
Yeah, so there's a head boss when you play Steelheart in the base game, and there's a couple other ones. And there's other sort of bad guys that they sort of ramp up, and they get different boards. You have like A, B sides, and there's a mix match that you get based on the difficulty level that just has more things coming at you each round. But yeah, we definitely could have added 2 or 3 more levels in both directions. And it would have been a little more expensive, but it might have had a better appeal to some people. Or even take the levels that we had and spread them out a little bit farther. Probably one of the two. Good question. Any other questions so far? Kind of just rambling here. All right. What we're doing time. All right. Okay. All right, so I can go, it's not out yet, it's Raising Robots, but I can tell you how it got started and how, because I think hearing how people get started on different games is helpful. So for us, Gen Con a year and a half ago, played Cora for the first time. It's a yellow game. I like it. So in Cora, there is abilities to select like 2 phases each. You roll 2 dice, and the dice range from 1 to 6 or 6 dice, and you assign a dice to a phase that you're going to run that round. And the higher the number, if whatever the number is, let's say it's 6, you can then use that dice to assign to any 1 through 5. So objectively, 6 is better than 5, and 5 is objectively better than 4. Because it just, basically, if you have 6, you have 6 choices. If you have 3, you only have 3 choices, so what phase you can have. That bugged me as a designer. But you have mitigating factors. They give you these things called people or population or something like that. You can spend those to up your dice. That allows you to hit that. And one of the common complaints of Cora, though, was, but it's still lucky. If I have this resource that can mitigate it, but if I'm just lucky, I don't have to spend that resource or invest in that resource than someone who doesn't. And I think luck is a good input, but it also has sometimes a bad feeling depending on how it displays itself. And so my fix was, well, and I'm still tempted to go back and actually just do it to Cora itself, was, well, what if you had a deck of these? Because I mean, one nice thing about this dice that roll is it makes you have a random input, so you have to make a new choice each round. Like there's no sort of solvable way. But what if I had a deck of cards that had 1 through 6 and maybe twice, and I flip over 2 each time? So that means throughout the game, we all have the same outcome. Sure, I can still use these population to increase these things. So the reason this game even got started was because we decided this game had this flaw. People are complaining about this flaw. What if we had a game that didn't have this, that had some good things about it? The phase selection. Now it's actually nothing like Cora, but the phase selection part is still there. And you have a deck now instead of a dice. You flip over 2 cards. You have to decide which phases to use those. And throughout the game, everyone's going to have, there is still luck involved, but it doesn't feel bad. But yeah. I actually, like I said, I can fit everything I've learned in game design in less than an hour. I did. So Any questions? All the notes I had written down of the lessons learned that I had thoughts for. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about since we're at Proverspiel too,
Yeah.
a little bit about your play testing process as far as like with raising robots, for instance? Like, how's that go? Is it internal and then places like this?
Yeah. So it's a little bit different when I started than when it is now. I have some good groups that I don't know I've trained. I don't know if that's the right word. that put up with me is probably the better word. So I think one key part of prototyping is getting to what you think is the magic. In my opinion, is that mechanic that is interesting, that's juicy, that has a good feelings to it, that's unique, and test that out as soon as you can. Don't make this giant world with all the rules, with all the theme. I almost always start most of my prototypes with like brick, wheat, some very basic stuff, because it's better to get to that point faster. Because I found there's too much time I would try to put all these themes to it, and I play 5 minutes into it, and I was like, this is broken, it stinks. And that's okay to find those things out, but you need to get to that point faster rather than waste your time spending so much time, because the more time you spend to it, the more you're tempted to spend more time on it. Coming up with things as fast as possible, taking out theme. So in this case, I'm going to plug the Game Crafter Component Studio. This is actually the second game we also use for Pinpoint, but it's been crucial for this one. This is the first time I've ever used a quadratic formula in my games. So, there's these robot cards. I talked about how you pick phases with numbers, so you get these random power amounts that flip up, and then you have to run different phases at these different power amounts, and depending on what power you run different phases, it runs the robots in those phases. And well, obviously a 1 is really easy to trigger because it's a small power amount, whereas 7 is the highest we have in the game. It's a lot harder to run. So even if you have the same power or ability, but it's running at a 1 power versus a 7 power, you should weight them differently, right? And so I have this quadratic formula. And so we have this huge advanced spreadsheets and Google Sheets that we've connected to Component Studio, so that we make changes, we can alter those formulas, and it's a lot easier. So if you haven't checked out Component Studio, I would recommend it. Even before that, though, we would do things on Microsoft Word and have our own templates, but the templates they have in Component Studio is a lot nicer, and it's not too expensive. So go Game Crafter. Though I am still upset that the Component Studio 2 does not link to Google Sheets. You have to have a separate full sheet. The first one. I've talked to him. He said it was someone else's API's fault, and he'll fix it sometime. So, I know, right? How much are you going to pay me? All right. So I will play it with my internal groups first. I don't see a huge need to do these things unless I've sort of passed that first tier or two. But groups like this is very necessary. And it also depends on your ability to find your own be honest with yourself. And here's your ability, I'll reiterate it again, do your homework. You need to be, if you're not on Board Game Geek daily, if you're not watching board game videos and reviews daily, if you haven't played hundreds of games, at the end of each year, I'll log how many unique games and things like that. You should be in the hundreds of unique games each year because there's hundreds of new games, thousands of new games every year. And you need to, even if you haven't played them, you should be finding out which ones are the hot ones so you can play those. Find out why people don't like certain games. So important.
So, related to that,
Yeah.
you said earlier on, you mentioned we're people with day jobs and families, we
Yeah.
spend a couple hours a week. That's not including being on Board Game Geek, or is that, how do you structure that 2 hours? If you only have 2 hours, what do you do in that 2 hours to maximize your game?
Yeah. So when I say we only play a few hours, my hobby of playing games if you add that on top of my Nauvoo games time, I mean, there's a good chunk of the week with board games. That said, you have to balance things. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I do things, try to do things as efficiently as possible when I do like board game reviews. I almost try to watch, for example, every Dice Tower review that they do. That said, I will jump to the parts where I need to watch, type of a thing. Or they have these like weekly updates that I'll go through those and I'll decide which ones to then watch more on, type of a thing. So you have to do it efficiently or you'll run out of time. It's tricky. It's a lot of time. So yeah. It's a good question. Luckily, my wife's very supportive. Probably, yeah. Lucky, and she's also into the hobby too. She's not as much of a board game nerd as I am. She won't look up anything about board games on her own ever, but she'll play board games with us. Which, if she didn't, like if I didn't, I wouldn't have enough time because the amount of. Luckily, some of us time is board game time as well. Because if it wasn't, there's no way I would have enough time to do that and stay on top of family and stuff like that. Oh, I think one of my notes I didn't say here is don't self-publish. Don't do it. Now, the reason
I agree with that.
now when I say that, when I say don't self-publish, don't do it by yourself. Even with us, who's had enough success that we've actually made some money, I wouldn't have done it at all, or even close to do it, with a day job without the other half of Nauvoo Games, which is Brett Sobel. And if I had to do the taxes and other stuff that he handles, luckily he does handle those things, I would also go nuts. So I would definitely recommend going the publishing route, or finding a publisher to do those type of things if you're just into the design part. Another thing, I can give a lesson not on one of these games. One of the games that was one of my favorites that I've worked on that I still want to get out at some point is a weather prediction game called Whether or Not. Maybe just because the name is so good, but and so in Whether or Not, it's very similar to, if you've ever played Liar's Dice. A lot of predicting the final outcome based on partial information that people get throughout the round. Then you get more and more information based on people's betting and other things and predicting the weather. And the thing I found out, even with Liar's Dice, is, and I think this goes along with sort of party games for us, is we found I really loved it. This is one of the few games that I was in love with, that I personally loved a lot, but there was just too many people around me that did not love it. Just because it was just not their style of game, and the game itself, because it's a betting game, and a lot of people who are into those type of betting games play things like poker and stuff. And so there's a percentage of them that I would never translate to buying this game. And so that was one of the games that we've given up on. That one I might pitch to someone else one day. But for us, I don't think we could make it financially ever worth our time. But sometimes you have to give it a quits, even if it's a great game. Any other questions? Thanks for listening to my rambles.